The night Emma walked into that engagement party, she believed she had finally won. She believed she had traded up, cashed in, and left behind every version of herself that had ever settled for less than she deserved. The chandelier above her cast its light across champagne flutes and white lilies, and the kind of laughter that only money can buy. And Emma stood at the center of it all, radiant in a gown she had never imagined herself wearing, on the arm of a man who made other women stare. She had made her choice. She had made it with open eyes and a steady hand. And she had not looked back, not once, not even when the little girl with the wide brown eyes had asked a question so soft and so devastating that it should have stopped the whole world. Emma had not stopped. She had kept walking, and now, standing inside the most elegant hotel in the city, surrounded by everything she had always wanted, she was about to understand exactly what she had left behind. Jake Calloway was not the kind of man who announced himself. He was 36 years old, lean and unhurried, with hands that bore the faint calluses of someone who had spent years over a hot stove and was not embarrassed by that fact. He wore plain clothes on his days off a gray Henley, clean dark jeans, scuffed boots that had seen real work, and when he dropped his daughter Lily off at school in the mornings, no one looked twice at him. He was just a father, just a man who packed lunches the night before and always made sure the sandwiches were cut into triangles, because Lily had once said triangles tasted better. He was the kind of man you could stand beside for years and never fully see, because he spent no energy at all trying to make you look. He had grown up poor. He knew what it felt like to count change at the grocery store, to wear shoes a half size too small because the right size cost $10 more. He had learned, early and thoroughly, that money was a tool and not a trophy. And he had never forgotten that lesson, even when the tool had grown very large indeed. At work, Jake was the executive chef of the Harlow Grand, the crown jewel of a hotel group whose name appeared in travel magazines and on the lips of celebrities who needed somewhere quiet and extraordinary to disappear. His staff adored him, not because he was not soft, but because he was fair and consistent, and when something went wrong in his kitchen, he fixed it without theater. He cooked because he loved it. He had always loved it. The rest of the story had grown around that love, almost without his permission. Emma Hartley had loved Jake for 3 years before she stopped. Or perhaps she had not stopped loving him so much as she had begun to love something else more. The idea of a life that looked different from the one she was living. She was 29, sharp-minded and quietly ambitious, working in marketing for a mid-sized firm where she was good at her job, but felt invisible in the way that competent people at ordinary companies often do. She and Jake had fallen into each other's lives through a mutual friend. A dinner party where he had arrived with a bottle of wine he had chosen carefully, and a quiet confidence that she found immediately, disarmingly attractive. They had been good together in the beginning, easy and warm and real. But as the months passed and became years, Emma began measuring the distance between where she was and where she had imagined herself being. And the measurement made her restless. Jake did not drive a luxury car. Jake did not take her to restaurants where the menus had no prices. Jake came home tired, sometimes flour-dusted, always gentle. And he talked about Lily the way other men talked about their greatest ambitions, with total, unguarded devotion. Emma had tried to love that. She had. But trying to love something is not the same as loving it. And eventually, the effort became visible in the silence between them. Victor Hale appeared in her life the way expensive things often do. Suddenly, and with tremendous confidence. He was 41, dark-haired and broad-shouldered, the kind of handsome that required maintenance but rewarded the effort. He drove a matte black sports car and wore a watch that Emma's coworker recognized from a magazine feature on timepieces that cost more than most people's cars. He had an answer for everything, a story that was always slightly larger than the last one, a way of making Emma feel like the most interesting woman in any room, which was, she would understand later, simply the particular skill of men who needed women to feel exactly that way. Victor called Jake the cook when Emma mentioned him. And there was enough contempt in those 2 words to communicate a complete philosophy. He did not say Jake was beneath her. He did not need to. He made her feel that she already knew it. And Emma, who was tired and restless, and had been watching other women her age climb into lives that gleamed, decided that Victor Hale was the answer to a question she had been asking herself for a very long time. She began to compare. Jake's apartment was warm and cluttered with Lily's drawings. Victor's penthouse was all glass and steel and curated silence. Jake cooked breakfast on Sunday mornings in an old cast-iron pan. Victor had a chef. Jake remembered how she took her coffee without being told. Victor had his assistant send flowers every Tuesday as a standing order. Emma looked at these two men, and she made a calculation. And the calculation, she was certain, was correct. The evening Emma ended things with Jake. The air in his apartment smelled like garlic and rosemary. He had been making dinner nothing elaborate, just a simple braise that had been going low and slow all afternoon. And when Emma arrived earlier than expected and asked him to sit down, he turned off the stove before he came to the table. That detail would stay with him for a long time afterward. He had turned off the stove. Even in the moment that was about to break something between them, he had been careful about the practical things. Emma said what she had rehearsed. She said she cared about him. She said it was not about anything he had done wrong. She said she needed something different, something more, a life with more possibility and more ambition and more of the things she had always wanted. Jake listened to all of it. He was still in the way that people are still when they are holding themselves together by concentrating very hard on doing exactly that. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask her to reconsider. Not at first. He asked her one question, quiet and direct, whether she was sure. She told him she was. He did try, once. He told her he understood she wanted more, that he had never wanted to make her feel like she was standing still, that if she needed time or space or something he had been failing to give her, they could talk about it. He was not begging. He was offering, which is different, and there was a dignity in the offer that Emma, in the moment, was not capable of recognizing. She told him it was not about fixing anything. It was simply done. She picked up her jacket from the hook by the door. She did not look at the photograph of Lily pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. She was almost to the door when Lily appeared from the hallway in her pajamas, squinting in the kitchen light, hair a little wild from an almost nap. She looked at Emma and then at her father, reading the room the way children do with their whole bodies, feeling the shift in the air before they understand its source. She asked her question in a small, careful voice whether Emma was going to stop being her mom now. The words landed without warning, clean and absolute, as a stone dropped into still water. Emma said something gentle and insufficient and left. Jake found Lily standing in the hallway 3 minutes later, sat down on the floor beside her, and held her without explanation until she fell back asleep against his shoulder. Victor was waiting outside in the car, engine running, music low. He asked how it went. Emma said it was fine. Victor said something about starting fresh, about new chapters, about how certain doors had to close. He reached across and squeezed her hand and smiled the smile that had gotten him everything he had wanted from everyone who had ever made the mistake of trusting it. When Emma glanced back through the window as the car pulled away, she saw the light still on in Jake's apartment and the shape of him standing in the kitchen. And then the car turned the corner, and there was only the city and the night and Victor's hand on hers, and she did not let herself feel anything she did not want to feel. She was very good at that. For a while, Victor's world was dazzling in the way that certain kinds of theater are dazzling, immersive, and total. And, if you watched closely enough, constructed entirely of borrowed light. He moved Emma into his penthouse within 6 weeks. He took her to dinners where the wait list was a year long, and the wine was older than either of them. He introduced her to people whose names she had seen in business columns, and to women whose jewelry she could not appraise but understood to be significant. He bought her things: a coat, a bracelet, a weekend bag in soft Italian leather, and presented each one with the timing of someone who understood that gifts are most effective when they arrive just as the recipient is beginning to feel uncertain. Emma wore the coat and told herself she had earned it. She had not, of course, earned it in any material sense, but she had paid a different kind of price for it, and she was not yet ready to examine what kind. The parties were extraordinary at first. Rooftop terraces over the city, catered by teams that moved in near silence. music from someone whose name everyone recognized but Emma could never quite place in the moment. She wore dresses she would never have chosen for herself before, in colors that Victor suggested, and in cuts he approved. And she photographed beautifully in them, which she knew because she had seen the images, and because people said so, and because Victor told her she looked perfect, while also mentioning, in the same breath, that she might want to think about updating her vocabulary when she was speaking with his associates. He said it lightly. He always said things lightly. But the lightness was a delivery mechanism, not a quality of the content. And over time, Emma began to feel the weight of each light thing accumulating somewhere she did not have a name for yet. He mentioned her hometown in a way that suggested it was a limitation she had only partially escaped. He met her family once, and drove home in a silence that said everything he had chosen not to say aloud. He was not cruel, he was precise. And precision, applied consistently in the right direction, produces the same results as cruelty, but is harder to object to, because each individual moment seems so small. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from performing an identity rather than inhabiting one, and Emma began to feel it around month 3, though she did not call it that. She called it adjustment. She called it learning the rhythms of a new life. She told herself that the occasional tightness in her chest, when Victor's friends laughed at something she didn't find funny, was simply the friction of belonging to a world she hadn't grown up in. She pushed through it the way she pushed through most things, with determination and a willingness to believe that the discomfort was temporary and the destination worth it. She reorganized her wardrobe with the guidance of a stylist Victor had recommended, and she threw away 3 dresses she had loved because they did not fit the aesthetic he had in mind. And she told herself this was growth. She stopped mentioning her hometown at dinner parties after the second time Victor changed the subject with a smoothness that was technically polite. She stopped calling her mother every Sunday the way she had for years, because the calls made her feel things she was trying not to feel, things about the gap between who she had been and who she was performing being. She was very close to the surface of herself. She managed not to notice. Meanwhile, in the kitchen of the Harlow Grand, Jake moved through his days with the quiet competence of someone who had nothing to prove and no interest in proving it. He arrived before his staff. He left after them when something needed finishing. He remembered the names of the sous chef's children and asked about them by name. When a new hire made a costly mistake on a Saturday night, a sauce broken beyond repair 40 minutes before a full dining room, Jake stepped in without comment and rebuilt it himself, shoulder to shoulder with the young cook, who was trying very hard not to cry. The staff had a word for the way Jake ran his kitchen. They called it trust, as in, you knew exactly where you stood, what was expected, what would happen if you delivered, and what would happen if you didn't. No theater, no unpredictability. Just the steady, dependable architecture of someone who had figured out who they were and stopped performing anyone else. On a Tuesday afternoon following a board meeting he had attended via a private channel upstairs, Jake walked through the lobby on his way back to the kitchen and past the front desk, where a new receptionist, startled by the sight of him in the main corridor, without his chef's coat, straightened up and said, very quietly and with a slight uncertainty, "Good afternoon, sir." Jake smiled and kept walking. He had a prep list to review and a parent-teacher conference at 4. What Jake Calloway had built over the past 11 years was not the result of a single stroke of luck or a well-timed inheritance or a connection that opened a door most people never found. It was the result of patience and precision and a willingness to remain invisible while building something that did not require visibility to function. He had started cooking professionally at 19, in a small hotel kitchen, in a city no one considered glamorous, and he had been good enough at it quickly enough that the hotel's general manager had offered him a position with more responsibility than his title suggested. Jake had taken the position and studied the parts of the business that no one had asked him to study. He had read financial statements the way he read recipes, looking for inefficiencies, for the places where what was intended and what was produced had come apart. He had ideas. He had always had ideas. He simply had not, at 19, had the means to act on them. His wife, Caroline, had believed in him before the means arrived. She was the one who had said, when he showed her the projections on a legal pad at their kitchen table, that this was real, that it would work, that they should find out what it would take, They had spent 3 years building the first property, a boutique hotel in a revitalized neighborhood, 32 rooms, a restaurant that earned its first positive review in a publication that mattered within 4 months of opening. Jake had been the chef and the general manager and the investor and, on several occasions when the budget demanded it, the maintenance crew. Caroline had managed the books and the marketing and the relationships with the vendors who needed to believe in them before the numbers gave them reason to. When Lily was born, they had been profitable for 11 months. When Caroline died, a sudden and total thing. A brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning in March. 2 weeks after Lily's first birthday, Jake had held the whole structure together by not letting himself come apart. He did not do this without cost. He did it because Lily was there, and because Caroline had believed in something, and he was not going to let it dissolve because he was grieving. He grew the portfolio quietly, systematically, over the following years. He hired people smarter than him in the areas where he was not smart, and he trusted them to work, and they did. He remained in the kitchen because the kitchen was where he was happiest, and because he had decided, after Caroline, that happiness was not something to be deferred until success was complete. He lived plainly because plenty had taught him nothing about that kind of plainness, and poverty had taught him everything. His staff at every property knew him as the chef who owned the building. To everyone else, he was simply the chef. His assistant, a precise and loyal woman named Diane who had been with him for 7 years, had asked him more than once whether he wanted to take a more public role to attach his name and face to the brand in the way that brands in the hospitality industry increasingly expected of their founders. Jake had thought about it each time she asked. His answer was always the same. He had learned, in the years since Caroline, that the people who stayed in his life because of what he was and what he had were not the people he wanted to stay. He had learned this at cost. He was not interested in paying that tuition again. He thought about Caroline sometimes, when a property was doing particularly well, when the numbers on a quarterly review reflected something that had begun on a legal pad at a kitchen table in an apartment he no longer had. He thought she would have found the whole thing quietly satisfying, not the wealth, but the rightness of it, the fact that it had been built on something true. He kept her photograph in his desk, rather than on his wall, because the desk was where he worked, and the work was where she had always believed in him, and that felt correct. Lily had her mother's eyes. Jake had never mentioned this to anyone except once, to Diane, in a conversation that neither of them had continued or returned to, because there are things that are said once and then kept, and that was one of them. The Harlow Grand's ballroom had been booked for the engagement party of Victor Hale and Emma Hartley on a Friday evening in October, and the event coordinator had done everything correctly: the flowers, the lighting, the 4-piece string quartet positioned near the east windows, the champagne service that began precisely at 7. Emma had chosen the Harlow Grand herself because it was the finest hotel in the city, and because she wanted to stand inside the finest things now that they were available to her. She did not know that the hotel she had chosen was the crown jewel of the group whose other properties she had passed on her way to work for 3 years, without recognizing what they shared. She did not know that the name on the deed was the same as the name that had once appeared on notes tucked into Lily's lunchbox. She did not know very many things that evening, and she was happier for not knowing them, in the way that the last minutes of a particular kind of happiness are always the best ones. She wore midnight blue. Victor wore custom charcoal. His associates filled the room with their names and their handshakes, and the low, pleasant hum of people who were certain of their standing, and had long ago stopped questioning whether that certainty was earned. Emma moved through it all, with the fluency she had worked for making conversation, accepting compliments, standing beside Victor with the posture of someone who had arrived somewhere they had always been meant to be. She was genuinely happy. Not the layered, complicated happiness of real intimacy, but the clean, bright happiness of surfaces, which has its own validity until the surface shifts, and which she had chosen because it was the only kind of happiness available when you have stopped looking at the things underneath. She was on her second glass of champagne, standing at the edge of the room, when she saw him. Jake walked into the lobby from the elevator bank at the far end, accompanied by Diane and a man Emma did not recognize. He was wearing a charcoal vest suit, no tie, the collar open, the cut precise, and he carried himself the way he had always carried himself. Without announcement, without visible self-consciousness, with the easy authority of someone who occupied his own space completely. Emma saw him and felt the immediate, disorienting collision of two separate realities meeting inside her chest. He looked different in the suit. Not like a different person. Jake was never a different person depending on what he wore, but like a version of himself that she had never been given reason to see. She watched him cross the lobby. She watched the woman at the front desk look up and immediately straighten. She watched the event coordinator, who had been speaking with a server near the entrance, glance over and do something that could not have been anything other than a small, reflexive bow. Emma set down her champagne glass. She crossed the lobby toward him. She told herself she was moving toward him out of she did not know what. Surprise. Curiosity. A desire to confirm that what she was seeing was exactly what it appeared to be, which was Jake Calloway, in a good suit, in her engagement party venue, looking like he belonged there in a way that she could not immediately explain. She reached him near the bottom of the main staircase. She said, with the specific lightness of someone trying to appear unaffected, that she had not realized he had upgraded to making deliveries at places like this. She meant it to sting just enough. She watched his face to see if it did. It did not. He looked at her for a moment, with the calm, level expression she had always found maddening, because it gave her nothing to push against. Before he could say anything, the hotel's general manager appeared at the top of the stairs and descended with the visible focus of a man who had just been told something important and was acting on it. He was followed by the director of operations and the head of guest services and two other people Emma did not have titles for yet. They stopped on the landing. They looked at Jake. They said, in the coordinated, certain way of people who have done this before, that it was good to have him here. Chairman. The word moved through Emma the way sudden cold is not sharp exactly, but total. A complete revision of temperature that took several seconds to register as real. Chairman. She looked at Jake. She looked at the general manager, who was now standing slightly to Jake's left with the attentiveness of someone in the presence of the person who signs his employment contract. She looked around the lobby at the marble floors and the flower arrangements taller than a man and the crystal detail in the chandelier she had admired when she booked the venue, and she understood that she was standing inside something that belonged to Jake Calloway, and that it had always belonged to Jake Calloway, and that she had left Jake Calloway to stand in this exact room on the arm of a man she had chosen because she thought he was more. Victor appeared behind her. She could feel him before she heard him, the particular presence of someone who had just understood that the room had changed shape. He stopped at her shoulder. He looked at Jake. Something moved across Victor's face that Emma had never seen there before. Not arrogance, not charm, but something raw and considerably less curated. Jake looked at Victor with the patience of someone who had already read the file. He said, quietly and without inflection, that it was good to see them both. Victor straightened. He made the kind of remark men make when they need to establish that they are not threatened, which established precisely the opposite. Jake, let it pass. He said he had a meeting to get to, and that he hoped the evening went well. He turned to go. Emma heard herself speak before she had made the decision to. She asked, her voice thinner than she intended, how long. Jake turned back. He looked at her with something in his expression that was not quite pity and not quite satisfaction and not quite sadness, but contained elements of all three. He said that the Harlow Grand had been in the portfolio for 9 years. He said the whole group was 11 years old this past spring. He said it the way one states a fact, without performance, and then he excused himself. As he reached the landing, Diane leaned in and said something low and brief. Jake shook his head. He kept moving. Behind Emma, Victor's hand found her arm, and she let him take it, but she was not inside herself anymore. She was somewhere behind her own eyes, watching the understanding arrive in pieces. Every cold morning she had spent in Jake's apartment, that she had called ordinary, every dinner she had eaten in his kitchen that she had compared unfavorably to restaurants she was not yet being taken to, every quiet Saturday she had tallied as evidence of his limitations. She had been measuring the wrong things. She had been measuring presentation against substance, and choosing presentation. And the cost of that choice had just introduced itself. The details assembled themselves in her mind over the following hour, with the pitiless efficiency of a final accounting. The building Jake's apartment complex sat in, she had always thought it was simply well maintained, never wondering who maintained it or why. The way hotel staff had deferred to him at industry events, she had dismissed as professional courtesy. Diane, whom Emma had met once and assumed was some kind of scheduling assistant, which she was, but not only. The board calls Jake had taken in the evenings, which Emma had resented as further evidence of a job that consumed more than it rewarded. He had been running a company. He had been running it quietly, with the same steady hands that braised short ribs on a Sunday afternoon and cut sandwiches into triangles and held a small girl in a hallway until she stopped being afraid. By the time the cocktail hour ended and the guests were being directed into the reception room, Emma had found a seat near the window and stayed there. Victor came to her twice with a glass of champagne she did not drink. He was performing normalcy with considerable effort, and the effort was visible in the way it had never been before, because now Emma was watching with different eyes, cataloging the performance as performance rather than as reality. She thought about what she knew about Victor's business interests, which was less than she had assumed because she had accepted his account of them without checking. She thought about the conversations she had half heard and not followed, the associates who seemed to owe him favors he was always collecting, the project names that changed slightly between tellings. She thought about her parents' retirement savings and the conversation Victor had initiated, twice, with a warmth she had interpreted as generosity, about investment opportunities he was positioned to offer family members of the people he trusted most. What Emma did not yet know but would learn before the evening was over, because the evening was determined to teach her everything at once, was that Victor Hale's wealth was largely theatrical. He had been, for most of his adult life, very skilled at appearing to be several steps ahead of the financial reality, which is a skill that works until the steps run out. His assets were leveraged to a degree that would have been visible to anyone conducting basic due diligence, which his romantic partners were not expected to conduct, and his professional associates had found ways to avoid. He had 3 active projects at the time of the engagement party, all of which were dependent on continued financing from partners who were beginning to ask the questions that people ask when they start reading the numbers more carefully. One of those projects, the largest, the one he had described to Emma's father over dinner as the cornerstone of a portfolio that practically ran itself, was contingent on a partnership agreement with a hospitality group that required renewal within the next 60 days. The hospitality group was the one whose chairman had just walked up the stairs of the Harlow Grand. Jake had read the partnership file on the flight back from a property visit 10 days earlier. He had read it the way he read everything carefully, without rushing, looking for the places where intention and reality had come apart. What he found had not surprised him. It had simply confirmed something he had been waiting to confirm before acting. He had not, until that evening, been certain he would act on it at the party. He had come for a board meeting, not for Emma's engagement celebration, and he had not known, until he saw Emma in the lobby, that the two things occupied the same building on the same evening. He thought about that for a moment, at the top of the stairs. He thought about Lily, who was at home with a babysitter, and who had asked him last week why the woman in the photograph on the old phone in his desk drawer looked so sad. Jake had told her the photograph was from a long time ago. Lily had accepted this with the practical wisdom of an 8-year-old who understood that adults sometimes needed time. He went into the board meeting. He was there for 45 minutes. When he came out, he found Emma waiting near the entrance of the reception room, with an expression he recognized. He had worn it himself, in the kitchen, the night she left. He sat with her for a few minutes. He answered her questions honestly and without cruelty. Yes, it was the whole group. Yes, 11 years. No, he had not hidden it. He simply had not announced it because announcement had not been the point. He told her that the partnership Victor was depending on the one involving Jake's group would not be renewed. He said it without relish. He said it the way a surgeon explains a prognosis. Direct, necessary, without theater. Emma asked why. He looked at her for a moment. And then he said what he had been carrying for long enough, that it had settled into something very quiet and very heavy. The hardest part had not been her leaving. The hardest part had been that in leaving the way she had, by choosing the story she had chosen, she had taught Lily something about what love looked like, that he had spent the following months carefully, patiently trying to unteach. Emma did not say anything. There was nothing adequate to say. Jake stood, straightened his jacket, and went to find Victor. What happened in the next 15 minutes happened quickly and in a low register. Because Jake was not the kind of man who made scenes, and because scenes were not necessary when the facts were sufficient, Victor lost his composure before Jake raised his voice, which Jake did not do. Victor said several things that were designed to be damaging and were not. He invoked his own prominence in a way that revealed how fragile his conviction of that prominence actually was. He accused Jake of making a business decision based on personal grievance, which Jake neither confirmed nor denied, because the business case stood independently and both of them knew it. At the end of it, Victor walked back into the reception room, picked up his champagne, and spent the rest of the evening being charming at the level of a man who has just been told something he cannot yet afford to react to in public. Jake said good night to the general manager and went home to his daughter. Emma left the party at 9:30. She did not make an announcement. She did not say goodbye to the guests who had toasted her future 40 minutes earlier, and would now, she suspected, find reasons to remember they had always had reservations. She found her coat and walked out through the lobby and stood outside on the steps of the Harlow Grand for a long time, breathing the October air, listening to the city. Victor texted at 10, then again at 10:45, then a third time, just past midnight, each message shorter and more aggressive than the last, which told her everything she needed to understand about the sequence of his priorities. She did not reply to any of them. She went to her mother's house and sat in the kitchen and drank tea, and did not explain anything except that she needed somewhere to be that was not the penthouse. Her mother did not ask questions. She put the kettle on and set out 2 cups and sat across from her daughter in the good quiet of someone who knows that the most useful thing is sometimes simply being present without agenda. Emma sat there for a long time. The kitchen smelled like the specific combination of her childhood dish soap and something always simmering, and the faint sweetness of whatever was in the fruit bowl, and she felt, in the middle of everything she was feeling, an unexpected and painful gratitude for the fact that this room existed and that she still had access to it. She thought about all the ordinary rooms she had been dismissing for 2 years, in favor of rooms that gleamed, and what it had cost her to dismiss them. And she did not try to stop herself from feeling it. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in any way that a camera could easily capture. Emma moved her things out of Victor's apartment on a Tuesday, with her brother's truck and 2 hours of quiet, sustained effort. She moved into a studio near her office that was smaller than the closet in the penthouse, and was, she discovered, sufficient. She went back to work with the kind of focus that appears in people who have cleared a large distraction from their field of vision, and are not yet sure what they are looking at. She worked well. She had always worked well. She stopped posting the kind of content she had been posting, and felt the absence of the response it generated like a withdrawal, which it was, and sat with the discomfort until it passed, which it did. She called her father and had the conversation about the investment opportunity Victor had proposed, and was relieved to find that nothing had been committed to yet, and grateful for the steadiness of her father's voice when he said he had been waiting to talk to her about it. Victor's situation became apparent over the following 2 months. The partnership was not renewed. 2 of his other projects lost their financing within 6 weeks of each other, which suggested that the dam had been holding against a pressure that had been building for some time. Emma learned these things from her brother, who had read them in a business brief, not from Victor, who had gone very quiet, in the way that people go quiet when the story they have been telling is no longer available. She did not feel the satisfaction she had expected to feel. She felt something closer to exhaustion, the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent a great deal of energy on something that was not what it appeared to be, and has finally stopped. She went back to the kitchen, not Jake's kitchen was his. And she understood that now, in a way, she had not before but to the small one in her studio, where she had, without fully deciding to, begun cooking for herself. Simple things at first. The way beginners cook. The way people cook, when they are learning that the act of making food is itself a form of attention they have been withholding from themselves. Then more deliberate things. She found that cooking required the same kind of attention that she now understood had been required from her in all the areas where she had looked away. And the attention, applied consistently, produced something real, which was its own lesson. There is a particular kind of satisfaction in a meal made slowly and eaten alone that has nothing to do with audience. And Emma discovered it in her small kitchen on winter evenings when the city was quiet and she was learning, with some difficulty and some grace, to be enough company for herself. She thought about Jake while she cooked, not always. Not with the acute, narrative pain of loss, but with the quieter ache of something understood too late. She thought about what he had said about what she had taught Lily, about love and money, and the story that gets told to children before they are old enough to question its terms. She thought about the little girl with the wide brown eyes and the question in the hallway, and she let herself feel the weight of that question fully for the first time. She wrote him a letter. She did not send it immediately. She wrote it and revised it over the course of 2 weeks, and then revised it a third time, until it said what she actually meant, rather than what she needed him to hear, which are different things, and the difference matters. When she was satisfied that it was honest, she sent it. Jake read it once and put it in the desk drawer, in the same drawer where the old phone had been, the one with the photograph that Lily had asked about. He thought about it for a few days. He thought about Lily, who had, without prompting, told him last week that she wanted to learn to cook, and who had stood on a step stool beside him at the counter. Very serious. Learning to crack an egg. He called Emma on a Sunday afternoon. Lily was at a birthday party, gone since noon, in a cloud of noise and excitement that Jake had watched depart with the familiar mixture of relief and tenderness. He stood in the kitchen while the soup he had on simmered low. And he spoke to Emma for 40 minutes. And he was honest in the way that he had always been honest, which was carefully and without performance. He told her that he was not the same person who had turned off the stove that evening before sitting down to be left. He was not worse. He was not harder. He was simply finished with leaving room for people who had not yet decided whether he was worth staying for. He said he appreciated the letter. He said he believed she meant it. He said that meaning something and having earned it were two different things, and that he had Lily to think about, which changed the calculus of everything. Emma listened to all of this. She did not argue with any of it. She asked if there was a version of this not rushed, not assumed, not pressured where she was allowed to try. Jake was quiet for a moment. He said he would think about it. He told Lily, that evening, that he had spoken to Emma. Lily received this information with the seriousness of someone for whom the information was not trivial. She asked her father if Emma was different now. Jake said he thought she might be getting there. Lily considered this with the gravity that 8-year-olds bring to the things that actually matter to them. Then she asked if she could meet her at the restaurant, meaning the new one. The small, warm, not famous one that Jake had opened 6 months ago in a converted storefront 2 blocks from their apartment, the one with his name on the awning and 12 tables and a menu that changed with the season. Jake said he would see. Lily said okay and went back to her homework. Jake stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, watching the light come through the window above the sink, thinking about how things that are built slowly and well tend to hold. The restaurant was full on a Saturday evening in late November, when Emma arrived for the first time. She had not been invited with the weight of an occasion. Jake had simply said the soup was good this week, if she wanted to come. She wore her own clothes, not the curated kind, not the kind that required approval, and she arrived at the time he had mentioned and gave her name at the door. The host walked her to a table near the kitchen pass, where the warmth from the stoves was most present and the smells were the deepest and most honest. There were families at 3 of the tables. A couple, celebrating something, quietly, near the window, a group of 4 who were having the kind of dinner where no one is performing, and everyone is actually present. The room had the quality of somewhere that had been built by someone who understood that the best hospitality is not spectacle but steadiness, the feeling, available nowhere for purchase but available here. That you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Jake came out of the kitchen when the initial push was over, wiping his hands on a side towel the way he had always done. And he sat across from Emma, and they talked for a long time. He was not different from what he had always been. That was the thing she kept returning to. Sitting across from him. He had never been different. She had seen him partially, through a lens she had not examined, and the lens had been the problem, not the view. She had looked at plainness and called it limitation when it had actually been choice, the considered, deliberate choice of a man who had learned early that what you need and what you display are entirely separate questions, and who had answered them both with a consistency she had mistaken for a lack of ambition. They did not resolve anything that evening. They were not supposed to. They talked like two people who are finding out, with some care and without rushing, whether the ground between them can hold something. The soup was as good as he had said. Lily appeared briefly, near the end of the evening. On her way through from the back, she had been doing homework in Jake's office before being walked home by the babysitter, and she looked at Emma, and Emma looked at her, and Lily said, in the particular manner of children who are watching adults carefully, that she liked Emma's shoes. Emma said thank you. Lily nodded with the gravity of a verdict delivered, and disappeared around the corner. Jake watched his daughter go. He turned back to Emma. He said nothing for a moment. He let the room do what it did, which was hold everything quietly, without judgment, in the way that honest places do. Outside, the city did its thing. Inside, the soup finished. The candles burned down. The evening arrived, without announcement, at the place where evenings that are going well eventually arrive not at a conclusion, but at the beginning of a thing that might, if tended carefully and not measured by the wrong instruments, turn out to be worth everything that came before it. Emma did not know, sitting there, whether this would become something. She was learning to be comfortable with not knowing, which was itself a form of growth she was still getting used to. What she knew, and what she let herself know clearly for perhaps the first time, was that the man across from her had never once asked her to see him differently than he was. He had simply been what he was, and waited to see whether she could meet him there. She had not been ready then. Whether she was ready now was a question that would take longer than one evening to answer. And Jake, who had spent 11 years building things that required patience, seemed to understand this without being told. Not every man who stands in a kitchen stands there because he has to. Some of them stand there because they built the whole building around the thing they love, because they understood early that the work that makes you most yourself is not always the work that others measure first. Jake Calloway had learned to cook in a cramped shared kitchen at 19, with no money and no plan, beyond the fact that something clicked into alignment when he was at the stove, a sense of purpose that felt different from anything else he had tried, more honest, more his own. He had followed that feeling through poverty and grief, and the long solitude of a single father doing the work of two, and it had led him, without detour, to exactly where he was standing. Some people choose their lives by what they are willing to accept. Jake had chosen his by what he refused to abandon. And there is a kind of wealth in that clarity that no amount of money can manufacture or replicate. He had what he had built, and he had Lily, and he had his kitchen, and the quiet, steady faith that the right things given time and care and honesty have a way of finding their proper form. And some lessons only become clear when the shine on everything else has rubbed away, and you are left with what was always real, with the warmth from the stove and the hands that know how to make something out of nothing, and the child on the step stool who is learning, with perfect attention, that the best things are made with care, and that the people worth loving are not the ones who glitter, but the ones who remain.